the pounding on my cabin door that evening wasn't the kind of knock you'd expect from a friendly neighbor introducing themselves. It was loud, forceful, and sharp enough to rattle the wooden frame. I froze for a second, coffee mug still in my hand, staring at the door as though it might burst open. I had only lived in this cabin for 2 weeks, and besides a few deer and the sound of the creek, I hadn't dealt with much human contact. But this knock, this demand for attention, carried something aggressive in it. I finally set the mug down, wiped my palms on my jeans, and opened the door to face whoever thought they had the right to pound like that. Standing there was a woman with short, stiffly sprayed hair, her arms folded tightly across her chest as though she were the sheriff of the forest. Her lips were pressed into a line so thin they almost vanished, and her eyes held the kind of cold fire you see in people who thrive on control. "You can't live here," she snapped, her voice sharp like a slap. I hadn't even said a word yet, but she had already judged me guilty of something I didn't understand. This cabin falls under the jurisdiction of Maple Grove HOA. I'm the president, and you're in violation of at least 6 community rules already. My brain stalled. 6 rules? Jurisdiction? HOA? I bought this place precisely because it was outside any association. I blinked at her, taking in the absurdity of what she had just declared. But before I could laugh, my gut tightened. "Excuse me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "This isn't part of Maple Grove, that was the first thing. I checked when I signed the papers. I bought this land because it's outside the HOA mess." She didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, as if her presence alone should be intimidating enough. "That's what you think," she said coolly. "But we'll see what the county says. If you don't register with the HOA immediately, there will be consequences." Her tone made my skin crawl, like she had already mapped out my downfall and was savoring it. And she wasn't alone. Behind her stood 2 others, watching with the eagerness of an audience at a staged performance. One was a man in his 40s with slicked-back hair, arms resting lazily in his pockets, wearing a smirk that screamed insincerity. He leaned toward Karen slightly, as though silently backing her up without needing to open his mouth. The other was an older woman, her posture timid, her face lined with hesitation. She kept glancing between me and the ground, wringing her hands nervously as if she'd been dragged here against her will. "Karen, maybe we should—" she whispered, her voice almost apologetic. But Karen cut her off with a hiss, shooting her a glare that silenced her instantly. "No, Linda, rules are rules." I crossed my arms, mirroring Karen's stance, though my heart was pounding in my chest. "Listen," I said firmly. "I own this land free and clear. I checked county records before I even thought about signing. Maple Grove HOA has 0 authority here, and you know it." The smirking man finally spoke, his tone dripping with mockery. "You'll find Karen's pretty good at extending authority." His smile widened like this was some sort of inside joke only they shared. Heat crawled up my neck. They weren't just mistaken, they were determined. My hand tightened around the doorframe, and before another word could slip out of their mouths, I swung the door shut with a thud, locking it immediately. But my pulse refused to calm. I leaned against the wood, listening as muffled voices outside debated whether to leave. Their footsteps eventually faded, swallowed by the crunch of gravel on the path back toward Maple Grove. I let out a shaky breath, forcing myself to believe it was over. Yet something told me this wasn't the end. That woman's tone, that man's smirk, it wasn't casual. It was a warning. When I finally stepped outside the next morning, the chill of the forest air hit me differently, carrying unease instead of peace. Nailed to my wooden gate, fluttering in the breeze, was a bright orange paper with bold letters across the top. Notice of violation. By the 3rd day, the notices had multiplied like weeds across my property. Each one was brighter, bolder, more ridiculous than the last. The first claimed my mailbox didn't meet community design standards. The second fined me for unapproved exterior lighting, even though the only light I owned was the lantern inside my cabin. The third accused me of excessive wildlife feeding, as if the squirrels, raccoons, and deer who wandered my woods had filled out paperwork requesting my hospitality. I tore the papers down, crumpled them in my fist, but with every notice I destroyed, 2 more seemed to appear overnight. The orange and yellow sheets turned my quiet. Wooden gate into a grotesque bulletin board. Then came the day 2 sheriff's deputies showed up, their patrol car crunching gravel as it pulled up near my porch. My stomach twisted into knots when I saw their uniforms, because in this world, once someone with authority listens to a lie enough times, it starts sounding like truth. One of the deputies, tall with a weathered face, stepped forward with a clipboard in hand. "Sir, we've had complaints about illegal residents outside HOA compliance," he said, his tone clipped but not hostile. I gaped at him, disbelief pouring out of my voice as I replied, "Illegal residents? This is my land, purchased outright, no ties to any HOA." The other deputy shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his partner as if even he wasn't convinced this was legitimate. The taller one sighed. "Look, we're just here because someone filed repeated harassment reports. Name's Karen. Something." My teeth clenched so hard I thought they might crack. Of course it was her. That woman had managed to twist her fantasy into police paperwork, and now I was the one defending my right to simply exist. I led them to the boundary markers, pointed out the county surveyor's posts still standing in the dirt, explained the paperwork. To their credit, they nodded, muttering that it looked fine, but the warning lingered in their voices. If she kept filing reports, they'd keep showing up. I stood on my porch long after they left, watching the dust trail fade behind their car, my pulse still hammering like I'd been accused of a crime. That evening, frustration boiled over. I stormed down the dirt trail that led into Maple Grove, determined to confront the source directly. The moment I crossed into their manicured world, the air seemed to change. Cookie-cutter houses sat in rigid rows, their white fences gleaming unnaturally in the setting sun. The sidewalks were too perfect, the lawns too green, as though each blade of grass had been personally approved by a committee. And on her porch, sipping from a wide glass of red wine, sat Karen. She looked like royalty on her throne, Paul lounging beside her like her loyal knight. The sight of them made my blood pressure spike. "Are you insane?" I demanded, my voice cracking across the quiet street. "You called the cops on me for living on my own property?" Karen's lips curled into a thin smile, her eyes flashing with smug victory. "Rules are rules," she said, swirling her wine as though this was all beneath her. "And you are in violation." My voice rose louder, echoing down the rows of cloned houses. "You're lying!" "My land has never been part of Maple Grove." "So I bought it to escape people exactly like you." Paul chuckled beside her, leaning forward on the porch rail. "Careful, buddy. Karen's got the board behind her. You'll lose before you even start." His words carried the weight of someone who knew the system was bent in their favor. My fists clenched at my sides, fury burning my throat raw. "You don't scare me!" I snapped. "You can't make up laws just because you don't like me living free." Karen leaned forward then, her expression twisting into something cold, something venomous. "Watch me," she whispered, her voice more terrifying than if she had screamed. I turned away before I did something reckless, my footsteps pounding the pavement as I made my way back to the sanctuary of my cabin. But peace no longer followed me home. By the time I returned, my phone buzzed with messages from townsfolk, neighbors whispering about a dangerous outsider. Linda found me the next day, her face pale, her voice shaking. "They circulated a newsletter," she admitted. Karen wrote it herself. "She's calling you a threat to community safety." My chest ached with disbelief. How far would this woman go? That night, headlights cut through my windows again and again, as cars slowed just to cast beams. Across my walls, I sat in darkness, barely breathing, each engine revving like a challenge. And then at midnight, I heard the sound of a hammer. I rushed to the porch, and there was Paul, planting another violation notice into a tree by my steps. "Hey!" I shouted, charging forward. "Get off my property!" He grinned, unfazed. "This isn't your property anymore. It's under HOA jurisdiction now. Welcome to Maple Grove, neighbor." My blood turned to ice. I spat the words, "You're trespassing." But he only leaned closer, voice dripping with arrogance. "Go ahead. Call the cops. Let's see who they believe, you or the entire HOA. His laughter followed me into the cabin, echoing long after he disappeared. I didn't rush into Maple Grove the next morning. even though every part of me wanted to. I knew if I went in half-cocked, Karen would twist my anger into evidence against me. Another excuse to paint me as unstable. Instead, I buried myself in research. County records, property surveys, HOA filings, all of it. I sat at my desk with papers scattered like fallen leaves, highlighter lines glowing under the dim lamp. And then I saw it, buried in a quiet corner of the county's digital archive. Maple. Grove's charter renewal had expired. Not last week, not last month, but 3 months ago. They hadn't filed the paperwork to maintain their legal status, which meant every violation, every threat, every fine they shoved in my face was legally worthless. The realization sat heavy in my chest. Part of me wanted to scream with relief, but another part warned me to tread carefully. People like Karen didn't back down when they lost ground. They doubled down, clawing and scratching until they dragged everyone else into the mud. Still, I spent the next 2 days gathering every shred of proof I could find. I printed documents, highlighted expiration dates, even got notarized statements from the county clerk confirming what I had uncovered. When the stack of papers was finally thick enough to feel like a weapon in my hands, I knew it was time. Maple Grove was holding its monthly board meeting, and if Karen wanted to play queen, I was about to pull the rug out from under her throne. When I stepped into their meeting room, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The chatter died. Eyes locked on me like I was a trespasser breaking sacred ground. Karen sat at the head of the table, gavel in hand, her posture rigid with authority. Paul lounged beside her, smirk plastered across his face, while Linda hovered in the corner, her eyes darting nervously between everyone. "You don't belong here," Karen snapped the moment she saw me. Her voice was sharp, rehearsed, filled with disdain. "This is a private board meeting." I didn't flinch. Instead, I dropped my stack of documents onto the polished wood table. The sound was louder than her gavel, the weight undeniable. "Neither do you," I said, my voice steady, colder than I expected. A ripple of whispers filled the room. Karen's face twisted, her composure cracking at the edges. "What nonsense are you spewing now?" she demanded, slamming the gavel once as though it could erase my presence. I opened the top page and slid it forward, pointing to the highlighted date. "Your charter renewal expired 3 months ago. This board isn't legally recognized. Maple Grove HOA hasn't existed in the eyes of the county since then. Every notice, every fine, every threat, you've been running a fraud." Gasps erupted around the table, chairs shifting as members leaned forward. Paul leaned in too, but his smirk wavered for the first time. "That doesn't change anything," he muttered. "People still listen to Karen." I met his stare with fire in my own eyes. "Not anymore. Because if this harassment continues, I'll make sure the county hears exactly how you've been extorting residents under the illusion of authority." For the first time, Karen's mask cracked. Her eyes darted across the papers, searching for loopholes that weren't there. Linda suddenly rose from her chair, her voice shaking but firm. "He's right. We've been living under fear, not law. Karen, you lied to all of us." Karen slammed her gavel again, voice shrill now. "Sit down, Linda. This is nothing but a stunt." But the air had shifted. The power that once wrapped around her like armor was slipping, replaced by doubt rippling through the room. The next morning, sheriff's deputies arrived again, only this time their business wasn't with me. Word spread fast that Karen's boxes of official, violation letters and fake financial records had been confiscated. Neighbors gathered in hushed clusters, whispering as they watched deputies carry out binders and boxes from her home. Karen stood on her porch, screaming, her voice breaking under the weight of her fury. "This is harassment!" she shrieked, pointing wildly toward the trees where I stood watching. Her gaze locked onto mine, venom dripping from every syllable. "This isn't over. You'll regret this. You haven't seen the last of me." Her screams cut through the neighborhood like a knife, raw and unhinged. I stayed at the edge of the forest, my boots sinking slightly into the damp earth as I watched her unravel. Part of me wanted to laugh at the sight of the self-appointed queen stripped of her crown, but another part of me felt only exhaustion. The peace I had come here for was no longer whole. Karen had lost the battle, yes, but the hatred in her eyes told me she hadn't surrendered. People like her didn't vanish when exposed. They sharpened their claws, waiting for the next strike. And as I turned back toward my cabin, the woods around me felt both safe and uncertain, the silence carrying an edge of tension I couldn't shake. What would you do if an HOA tried to control land you don't even live in? Do you think Karen will try to come back for revenge? Or was this finally the end of her fake power? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share your own nightmare neighbor stories, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see what happens the next time Karen decides to cross the line.